for. And then what we're going to do in the 2020 Division of Revenue Act, once it's enacted, that we're going to allow for further changes to be made to respond towards COVID-19. And then what we're also proposing, and we presented it when we presented the Division of Revenue Bill to the Select Committee on Appropriation, that we're also asking the committee for approval to make some changes to conditional grant frameworks that's already published as part of the 2020 Division of Revenue Bill. And to give a few examples, for example, the health conditional grant frameworks currently don't provide for expenditure on PPEs. So if you add to the conditional grant a condition that it may be used towards PPEs, then that expenditure can be addressed. The same applies, for example, for taxi ranks. Currently does not provide for expenditure related to, for example, for sanitization of the taxi ranks or also for PPEs. So if you add that to the conditional grant frameworks, then you enable spending towards COVID-19 without securing additional money. And that is in short supply, as the next slide will show. Next slide, please. Okay, why this slide is quite important, it actually currently indicates how the process will work. Currently, the proposal is that we use the existing legislation and try to get it through the parliamentary process as fast as we can, and then shortly thereafter then present a specific budget that will specifically deal with COVID-19 related expenditures. So the intention is to get the Division of Revenue Bill passed through the NCOP by the 2nd of June. And after that, the appropriation bill must still be processed through the parliamentary process. And only after that is concluded can we introduce a new COVID-19 related budget. So we expect it most probably a new COVID-19 budget to be tabled in Parliament around July, either very late in June or otherwise somewhere around in July. And only after those legislation has been processed can we then deal with the 500 billion allocation that's been made available or announced by the President. But what's also quite important to note is that as soon as the current Division of Revenue bill is passed and the changes that we propose to the conditional grant frameworks are allowed, we can pull the expenditure forward so that spending on COVID-19 can already happen before that. And that is why we're asking for the request to make those changes to the conditional grant frameworks. Next slide, please. Okay, this just gives an outline of the presentation, and we'll take you through that in our presentation. But just to indicate again that everything that we present are either contained in the Division of Revenue Bill or in Chapter 6 of the budget review that were tabled in Parliament on the 26th of February 2020. Next slide. Okay, this is a very gloomy slide, unfortunately, but unfortunately we need to deal with a lot of doom and gloom. The first doom and gloom that we had to deal with, that even before we had COVID-19, the country was already facing a severe and tough economic climate. The economic outlook was already weak. Growth was already quite low at 0.9% in 2020, and it was projected to be 1.3% in 2021 and 1.6% in 2022. So the COVID-19 just adds to that. And because we had quite a low growth, it also has got a downward impact on our tax revenue that we can collect. And we under-collected in terms of our taxes by 63.3% billion in 2019-20. So it shows that we were really already facing quite a severe economic crisis. So even then it was already decided that in that situation, there's two choices we can make. The one is to continue spending at existing levels and see debt really going out of sight of control in the end, that we will just be spending all our budget on debt expenditure and the repayment of debt, or to look at more drastic steps or more nuanced approach where we see how can we actually bring in the fiscal framework so that the revenues that we collect are more in line with expenditures that we do, because currently the expenditures are much higher than the revenues that we collect. That means we need to borrow quite a bit. So when we presented the 2020 budget on 26 February, we already proposed baseline reductions of 261 billion, which included a 160.2 billion reduction in the wage bill. But as a future slide shows, those reductions have not yet been incorporated in the provincial fiscal framework because the wage negotiations are still underway. So as soon as the wage negotiations are concluded, those adjustments will be made. So the outcomes of that is still ongoing and the results are not yet known. Next slide. Okay, and then what this slide indicates is that despite the reductions that we're making, and maybe it is how we nuance the reductions that's quite important, because keep in mind, every budget that we present has got the actual year that gets approved. For example, last year, what was approved was the 2019-20 allocations. And then what we indicate as part of the budget to enable provinces and national to plan and municipalities also to plan, we allow them and we indicate the 2-year allocations as indicative allocations. So what is really happening is last year when we presented the 2019-20 budget, we indicated what the indicative allocations for 2020-21 will be and for 2021-22. So what is happening in the 2020 budget is what we announced in the 2019 budget, what will be your allocation in 2020-21 is now lower than what we indicated what it will be. But that doesn't mean it's a reduction in allocation. It's rather a slower growth in allocations than what we indicated what will happen in the 2019 budget. And just to highlight that point, if we look at the provincial allocation, it still grows in total by 6%, and 6% is above the inflation rate. That means allocation still grows in real terms. And if you look at the equitable share, it grows by 6.3%. And if you look at conditional grants for provinces, it still grows by 4.7%, which is also above inflation. The same applies to local government. If you look at the local government allocations overall, it grows by 6.6%, and the equitable share, given that it makes provision for increased number of households and also caters for the increased cost of providing basic services, it increases at 9.2%. And if you look at the local government conditional grant allocations, it only grows by 2.4%. And then you would say, ask the question, why are local government allocations growing so slowly? And unfortunately, the answer is caused by a lot of under-expenditure on local government conditional grants, because that was one of the criteria that was taken into account when we determined where we can make reductions to allocations. So it's really an area that needs to be addressed, is how can we actually ensure that local government spends the allocations on its conditional grants that it receives and address the gaps that's causing those allocations not to be fully utilized. Because in the end of the day, it adversely impacts on the people on the ground that are then deprived of getting that infrastructure and those services linked to that infrastructure. Next slide. Okay, what this slide does is just to highlight again the point I made in the previous slide, and this highlights that despite the reductions that's been made, if you look at the red line, it indicates that, and you look at the part that's been highlighted, it then indicates that the line remains stable and it doesn't go down. And if you look at the grey line, it shows the same, it doesn't go down. This is just again to highlight the fact that allocations grow at a slower rate, but the allocations are still growing in real terms. So what this slide also indicates are the reductions that's been made. A 2% reduction for non-wage spending, and that is efficiency gains. And then also technical adjustment because the inflation was much lower. Therefore, the expenditure, the projection that we had in the inflation for when we projected the 2019 budget was higher than the actual inflation. So we just rebalanced it to reflect the actual CPI inflation. Since then, the inflation number has come down even more. And then the same on the local government side. It just indicates what has been done. Funds have been set aside that was not allocated yet, and that has just been returned again to the fiscus to ensure that we don't increase the debt cost for national too much. Next slide. And again, what this slide indicates is again just what we've pointed out in previous slide. And this slide also indicates what criteria was used to determine what reductions will be made to what conditional grants. It looked at past spending and performance. It also looks if it funds salaries, medicines, and food. If it funds salaries, medicines, and food, no reductions were made. And then it also looked at the percentage growth. Some grants grew at a very, very fast rate, and that growth rate was just curtailed. What this slide, the top slide shows is the red line shows the actual allocations, and the grey above that, it's quite small. It shows actually then what was projected in the 2019 budget and the reductions made. And if you look at the local government side, you could see there's a bit of a dip, but it's not going to adversely impact on service delivery because this just takes into account the under expenditure that you've got on the local government conditional grants. Next slide. Again, what this slide tries to show is to show that the division of revenue is redistributive. For example, if you look at where most of the tax revenue is collected, it's mainly collected in Gauteng. And what this will show, if you look at the top line, you could see, let's just use KwaZulu-Natal as an example, because we're currently in KwaZulu-Natal, although I'm sitting in Gauteng. It shows that Gauteng, where the highest taxes are collected, the per person transfer in the province, the equitable shares, the red part, is 7.4 per person, and in 1.6 in terms of conditional grants. But if you look at KwaZulu-Natal, where there's much higher levels of poverty than in... And if you look at KwaZulu-Natal, you could see that it's 9.9 in terms of the equitable share. And if you compare to Eastern Cape, for example, it's 10.6. So that just shows the allocation then per person. And the same, if you look at local government, it shows per household. And it shows that in urban areas where more taxes are collected than in the rural areas, you could again see the same trends, that rural municipalities get much larger shares in terms of their per household than what you will get in an urban municipality. And that's largely an acknowledgement that urban municipalities have got a much stronger own revenue base, for example, through property rates and tariffs and the like, and therefore they're much less reliant, or they should be much less reliant on transfers from the fiscus than your more rural municipalities, where they've got much less ability to collect their own revenues. It doesn't mean that they've got no ability to collect, of course, their own revenues. It's just much less than in the urban areas. Next slide. Okay, what this slide shows, and this is the actual text of the Division of Revenue Bill, 99% of the bill remains the same the act remains the same every year. And then what we do two types of changes. We do policy changes and we do technical refinements. The technical refinements we pick up from people that actually implements the legislation and then pick up loopholes and areas where we can improve. And the policy changes are areas where we want to ensure that we get better outcomes in terms of the grant money that's made available. And a few years ago, we introduced what we call the Built Environment Performance Plans. It was to enhance the IDPs, because the IDPs were not necessarily fully representative of picking up how do you get integrated human settlements, particularly in larger areas like metropolitan areas. And so a new tool was then introduced, what we call the BEP, to allow that we formalize, the integrated, that water talks to electricity, that housing talks to roads, for example, so that you get more compact spatial form, so that you can actually boost economic growth. So the reason why two cities have now been exempted from this requirement, it will be Cape Town and Johannesburg, is because they've taken all those principles that were built in the BEPS and actually incorporated in the existing planning processes. So all the requirements that were contained in the BEP is now so institutionalized in their normal planning processes that BEP will just be a duplication. So those municipalities have then been exempted or will be exempted from the BEP requirements. And as more municipalities fully incorporate those principles into their own planning processes, then more municipalities will be exempted from that. And another point to make here is that the Department of Cooperative Government is also reviewing the IDPs and actually looking at strengthening them to actually also cater for integrated human settlement development, which is also going to result that the BEPS will eventually fall away, which is a very good thing, because then it's institutionalized in normal planning processes. And then every 4 or 5 years, we've got a provision that makes provision if there's municipal boundary changes after municipal election. So we don't know yet whether the elections will take place before the end of the municipal financial year in 2021 or after that. So that is why we have got this provision, so that if an area, and it has hit KwaZulu-Natal as well, where there's boundary changes, but the allocations will then still be with either the giving municipality or the taking municipality, and just to ensure that you don't have a lack of expenditure in the areas that's been impacted by the demarcation, that spending can continue in that area without any problems. And then we made a number of changes, the technical changes that we've picked up these gaps where we can further strengthen existing provisions to ensure that the loopholes are addressed. We've had in the system components to conditional grants for quite a while. For example, the health grant has got a number of components, and it's just to formally legislate it and regulate the process of transferring money between one component and another. Then the next one is to set a timeline for a province and a municipality, also to ensure that, again, there's predictability in the allocations and certainty in the allocations. Next slide. And then again, just to ensure that acts that resulted in funds being withheld or stopped, that is addressed. Province and municipalities must now report on what remedial actions they have taken to ensure that they don't get withheld or stopped again. And then there's also a requirement for provinces to consult municipalities before gazetting Human Settlements Development Grant. And also that was been a requirement in the past, but what is now in addition to that is also set a timeline for the payment schedule, because a problem that we had is that although provinces will indicate what money they will transfer to municipalities for the HSDG, they never indicated when the transfer will be made. So, of course, what logically often happens is that those transfers are often made just before the end of the national financial year. So it really does not give predictability for municipalities to plan for housing projects. And then another requirement is just to bring in transparency in the process, is to require that in the financial statements, the provincial departments must include information on the amounts of conditional grants that they transfer to municipalities or public entities. And then the last one is to allow for amendments to be made to the payment schedule between provincial departments and any municipalities, if agreed to, between the provincial department and the receiving, be it a school, be it a municipality and the like. Again, it's just to ensure predictability of funds and also transparency in the process. Next slide. And then I'm going to hand over to Emmanuel that's going to take you through the provincial allocations, and Yolande will take you through the local government allocations. So Emmanuel, over to you.
Thanks, Wendy, and thank you, Chairperson. So the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about the allocations that were made to provinces over the MTF, both for equitable share and conditional grants. Now, the first slide talks reflects the equitable share transfers to provinces. And the equitable share is basically a formula that divides the revenue amongst the 9 provinces, and is based primarily on shifts in population, basically. So, but there's also other components that add to it, which I'll explain briefly. So, in terms of the data that we use for the equitable share formula, it's mainly official data, so it's mostly from Stats SA that we use, or from departments such as the Department of Health, which provides patient data, for example. If you look at the table on the top right-hand corner, you'll see the provincial equitable share allocations for the MTF for all provinces. As Wendy indicated, the average growth overall is 6.3%. But if you look at KZN as an example there, it grows only at 5.2% over the MTF. So KZN has the second largest allocation in terms of the equitable share transfers after Gauteng, which grows quite significantly at 8.2%. So the main reason for the low growth when compared to other provinces is that the province has over the past few years been experiencing net out migration of people. So KZN, along with the Eastern Cape, for example, has also been growing at a lower rate than what other provinces are growing at. In terms of the data that we use for the formula, there's six main components, and there's some sub-components under that as well. So in education, for example, we use the mid-year population estimates. So we use the school age population between the ages of 5 and 17 as one, and the other one is the number of learners enrolled in the school system. There's a system called LURITS that the Department of Basic Education uses to track students from grade 1 right up to grade 12. So we use that number. In terms of health, we use the mid-year population estimates as well. So a lot of the components we use, if you see in brackets, it says new data there. So we're using, in previous years, we're using, for example, census data. So now we're using more updated data, which is the 2019 year population estimate data. Yeah. So in terms of health, there's two or three main categories. One is the uninsured population or the insured population, and the patient load data, which is provided by the Department of Health itself in terms of how many patients are going to the facilities and what's the load in each province, basically, and that's reflected in the formula as well. The basic share is just the population of each province, and obviously this will impact in KZN if you're experiencing net out migration of people out of the province. Okay. The other components are not so important or major in terms of the share itself. Remember, education and health account for more than 75% of the formulas as well. So we just have the poverty component, which is quite small, economic development one, and then the institutional component, which is not based on data, it's just an equal allocation across all provinces. Okay. Now the equitable share itself is not prescriptive in terms of when we transfer it to provinces. There's no conditions attached to it, so it depends on the provincial executive in terms of how they want to allocate the funds. But in the past year, we did make some additions to the formula in terms of priorities that we think need some attention as well. And these are the sanitary project, gender-based violence support, and social worker support. Now, these are amounts that transferred to all provinces that are also a priority that needs to be considered. Now, there has been work on the formula itself over the past years, and there continues to be current year as well. So there's going to be work on the education, health, and poverty components, and also the rural component as well. The work is ongoing in the 2020 financial year. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, just in terms of conditional grants, some changes to take note of. The early childhood development. Now, this provides for subsidies to children in early childhood care centers. Now, the current subsidy, generally across all provinces, but not all provinces, is around 15 Rand per child per day. Now, 1.4 billion Rand is being added to this grant to increase the subsidy to 18 Rand 57 cents in the 2022-23 financial year, and also to provide for an extension to bring in more kids into the system as well. So 1.4 billion is added across all provinces, basically. In terms of health grant, there have been some quite a few changes. So the health conditional grants as well is also undergoing a review as well, in terms of aligning it to the NHI and also to include service delivery. So that's reflected in the grant below that. You'll see that two grants that were separate grants in the previous financial year becomes a single grant in the current financial year. So we're merging it to be more streamlined in terms of the purpose of the grant. So in the previous financial year, we had the health professionals training and development grant and the human resources grant. So this is being merged into one grant there, and it's called the Statutory Human Resources Training and Development Grant. So this is more to provide training for health practitioners who wants to specialize, and also to provide for the recruitment of doctors and specialists as well. In terms of the National Tertiary Services Grant, so this is the grant that provides for tertiary services, specialized services in central hospitals sometimes. So here, there are some rural provinces, KZN is not one of them here, that have that require some sort of development in terms of the services they provide. So there is a component that's been provided, but KZN is not affected on this component. And obviously there's continuous need for the improvement in the activity for the implementation of the NHI as well. The Comprehensive Agricultural Support Grant. Now, this is a grant in agriculture that's used to support farmers. It's also got an infrastructure element as well. But one of the main purposes is to provide extension services for farmers to be supported in terms of their farming practices, and also running their farms as a business as well. So some funds have been taken out of this grant and is being taken to support animal testing and disease control. So this is more towards biosecurity, and the funds have been moved to for testing at the borders as well, so that so that it can support the export sector in the country. So, for example, if there's a outbreak of a certain disease, this would obviously impact on that. So this testing money will actually, in the end, support farmers in all provinces in terms of exporting. The next slide. So this is the overall allocation of provincial conditional grants. So it's allocations to all provinces. Now you'll see there's a number of grants. I'm not going to go through each one of them here, but just to say that the total value of the grants increases from 107 billion in the first year of the NTFO to 123 billion in the last year of the NTFO. So although there have been cuts, and although our economy is constrained at the moment, the allocations for conditional grants still continue to grow. Now, the details of this is obviously available in the Division of Revenue Bill, which is available on the National Treasury website. But my colleague will take over with the local government slides for now. But I'll come back towards the end and just explain what the allocations are specific to KZN, and also talk about some performance issues as well. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you. We're looking now into the local government equitable share in terms of what has been allocated for the new financial year. In terms of the formula of the equitable share, we still fund the free basic services, which 54.1 billion has been allocated. And in terms of the formula, we have seen that the data has been updated to take into account poor household. We have updated funds from 10.4 to 10.8 million from 2021 to 22-23 financial year. The formula also takes into account the update of the electricity, because of the electricity increases, and also taking into account NERSA increases. Next slide, please. With regards to the changes into local government grants, we look into the informal settlement upgrade component. This component is currently sitting with USDG grant. However, this grant will be separated in 2021. Municipal infrastructure grant, there are some changes also there with regards to it would now accommodate it will now accommodate the purchasing of specialized waste vehicles. This will be done through the transversal contracts. And then with regards to the IUDG grants, there's a new municipality that is joining in, which is Tshwete. So their allocation will move from the municipal infrastructure grant to the integrated urban development grant. Public transport network grant, there are 3 municipalities that this allocation would be suspended from, which are Buffalo City, Msunduzi from KZN, and Mbombela. The reason for this suspension is because the grants in those specific municipalities, they have not achieved what was meant for the grant in terms of building infrastructure relating to transport. And then there's additional 750 million that has been allocated to address the issues of the VAL system rehabilitation. This money, it will be allocated through the regional bulk infrastructure grant. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay. With regards to the infrastructure development or investment, we have taken into account that infrastructure can actually attract potential investment. So we've come up with ways to assist municipality in order to increase or improve their investment into the infrastructure projects. Project planning is one of the biggest constraints of municipal infrastructure investment. Well-designed projects have been potential to, while investment have potential to attract more private investment and borrowing. So we have identified the Integrated City Development Grant, which municipalities can use in 2021 to be able to prepare in order to attract more potential investment in the local government space. Legible metros will need to submit letters to National Treasury, which will indicate their commitment to establishment and institutionalizing an effective system of programs and project preparation. So municipalities would be expected, or those municipalities that would be eligible for this, they have to submit information to National Treasury, and also they must not have had an adverse or disclaimer of audit opinion in the last 2 financial years. And then what we're going to look at is that adopting the city's infrastructure and management system guidelines and establish programs and project approval committee, which will function as the authorizing investment and committing to co-financing contribution and budget management arrangements. This approach is going to be extended to other municipalities as we move along. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. With regards to the local grants, we've seen the trends on what Wendy has presented earlier, and we can see that local government conditional grant is increasing steadily. From the 1920 financial year to 22-23, we see an increase from 52.1 billion to 56.3 billion. So there has been a steady increase, which was discussed earlier. These allocations, as Emmanuel has mentioned, are available in our Division of Revenue Bill. And we're going to also zoom into allocations per municipality for KZN. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So if you just go to the next slide. In KZN in 2020 provincial allocation. So this is broken down into the, sorry, I just can't see the slide on screen. 1 second, please. Okay, so slide number 21. So the equitable share transfers, as we indicated earlier in the slide 13, is the first 111 billion going to 123 billion. The conditional grant for the province increases from 22 billion to 23.68 billion in the 2023 financial year. So these are the grants that are available to the province, but they're broken down into the different sectors. Obviously, in agriculture, we have 3 grants. I'm not going to go through each one. I'm just going to highlight where I think there have been some changes that you can take note of. So if you go to slide 22, okay, on slide 22, so just as I indicated in the Department of Health and their transfers of conditional grants, you no longer have health professionals training and development grants. So that's been obviously merged with the human resources grant, and that's the last one they will see, which increases from 593 to 37 million over the MTF. In terms of human settlements, the main grant is the Human Settlements Development Grant. Now, what we did in the past 2 financial years, we included a window for the informal settlement upgrading grant. So it's not actually a standalone grant, but depending on the processes that go forward in this current year, and if the department and the sector is ready, then this will be a standalone grant in the second year of the financial year. So that's why you see there's nothing in the first year, but it increases to 714 million in the second year. So it's actually not a new grant. We just take money out of the main human settlement development grant. You see that decreasing over there, and that also applies to the second and the third year of the MTA. The provincial emergency housing grant. The thing here is that it's a Schedule 7 grant that remains unallocated. So that's why you're not seeing anything as bright as here. So it's an unallocated month. If the province experiences an emergency that needs funding, then we will allocate that in the adjustment budgets. The title deeds restoration grant. Now this is a grant that has been a standalone grant for the past few years, but from the second year of the MTF, it goes back into the HSDG grant as well. So it becomes absorbed into that. So mainly for providing for title deeds for a certain period, I think, there. And overall, the performance on this grant hasn't been well across provinces. Some provinces have performed, but mostly haven't. So this is being absorbed back into the Human Settlements Development Grant. Public Works Grant, obviously we only allocate for the first year because it's incentive, so it depends on what performance is on previous years there. We go to the next slide. Sorry, just 1 second. Yeah, the next slide, please. Okay, just in terms of performance, so this is the information that we received through our reporting systems. So it's preliminary data, it's not confirmed as yet, or it's not audited. So these numbers are subject to change as well. So it's just the performance of the conditional grants for the last financial year. Now, generally, KZN has been quite good in terms of their expenditure. It's just a few grants that I need to highlight in terms of performance. For example, in agriculture, if you look at the CASP Ilima grant, which is not fully spent, so there could be a reason for that. It could be that the money is committed and needs to be rolled over. But if you go back 2 or 3 years, you'll see that the grants, this sector has been struggling somewhat in terms of performing on this, especially on the CASP grant. I think in the 17-18 financial year, the department actually surrendered around 30 million back to the National Revenue Fund. So this is just one of the grants that are highlighting that could be a problem. Obviously, the second one is the Community Library Services grant. Only spent 84% of the grant, so there's quite a bit of funds unspent there. In terms of the provincial, the disaster grants, well, this sometimes it's a bit difficult because funds are transferred late into the financial year, so provinces can end up not spending. But there is a possibility of getting rolled over. So not only KZN, some other provinces also experience performance issues on grants, especially if they transferred late in the financial year. Next one, the next slide. Okay, so as I indicated before, you see that the title, the provincial emergency housing grant in human settlements is only at 43%. So as I indicated, it wasn't transferred at the beginning of the financial year. It was transferred in the financial year, or a few months into the financial year, so the department couldn't spend that. But as I indicated as well, there is an opportunity for funds to be rolled over. So it's not given that the department will lose that money as such over there. Yeah, so I think that's basically the conditional grants in terms of performance, and just a few grants that I think might be an issue in terms of spending. But as I indicated, there is an opportunity for funds to be rolled over. So, and obviously these numbers are not final in terms of the audit, it's just preliminary numbers for now. I think that's all. Thank you.
Wendy,
Okay.
are you finished, Wendy? Hello?
Yolanda is just quickly going to take you through the local government allocations, and then we'll be done.
Okay, that is fine. That is fine.
Okay. I'm going to take you through quite quickly in terms of the allocations to the local government. The first slides, can you move the slides right to that one? It just reflects how much has been allocated per municipality for the financial year 2021 and the 2 outer years. So we can see from this slide how much has been allocated. 14.6 billion has been allocated in total to KZN. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this slide, it just gives us a breakdown in terms of what has been allocated in terms of conditional grants. We can see that municipal infrastructure grant has been allocated quite a number, which is 3.1 billion. The USDG, which goes to eThekwini municipality, has been allocated 1.9 billion, but in total of KZN for conditional grants, they have been allocated 8.8 billion. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, this slide just reflects the expenditure for the past 3 financial years. These also its preliminary numbers that we received through the Section 71 reports from municipality. If you look in terms of expenditure or what municipalities have reported in KZN, you can see that an average of 1.7 billion, it's not being spent. And this money, it's what they are recalled into the National Revenue Fund. So this table, it makes us ready to think when allocations are being made to municipalities, if they are not able to spend their full monies that have been allocated to them, because as you can see from the reports, you can see the trend. It's almost 1.4, it's between 1.4 and 1.7 billion that is unspent every year. Thank you.
Wendy, your team is finished.
Thank
you very much. Colleagues and friends, I would request that you stick to this new trend that we are getting from the guys who are working behind the scene. We have been told that we are on YouTube. That's what I'm told. So then if it is like that, we would request that you show yourself, and then by switching on your camera when you want to speak. That's the first rule that would request that we stick to. The second one is that when you are speaking, would request that you give us your name, the organization where you come from, and even the position if you are comfortable in doing so. Would be very, very happy if that would be done. So I have forgotten to show my face as well. So that's what I want to request that we do. I'm not discriminatory because I'm highly democratic. But because the honorable members of the Finance Portfolio Committee are going to deliberate on the bill after at the end of this engagement of all of us, I would want to give them the first opportunity to ask questions and comments on the bill as presented by our friends from the National Treasury. But there is one thing that all of us are understanding, especially we who are doing oversight, is that whenever we are underspending our budget, then we are going to be cut first when the cuts are about to take place, as you have heard the presentation. Thank you very much. Honorable members, can you indicate who wants to speak? Do you want me to check you one by one? Honorable Governor, do you have anything to say on this bill? I know we have dealt with it in the meeting last month.
Chairperson?
Yes,
I just wanted to say that whilst we were not happy with some of the reductions that occurred, we do understand that due to underspending, funds have been cut in certain areas. Like I'm looking at the municipalities, the USDG and the Neighborhood Partnership Development Grant, where there were cuts. So I think the lesson to us and the message has to be that when funds are allocated, they have to be spent. If they're not spent, as we say, you snooze, you lose. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Honorable President Hlabisa, do you have anything, my leader?
Chairperson, not for now.
Thank you very much. Honorable Madlopa, do you have anything to raise, madam?
No, thanks. I think, Honorable Chair, what we can request is that the government will have to provide regular updates on the impact of reduction of the conditional grants on service delivery. But we understand also that there is a challenge on the expenditure, under expenditure that is taking place in local government, and will plead with the colleagues that they really need to spend money, because the failure to spend affects our communities on service delivery and also on the employment and the growth in the economy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Honorable Rogers.
Thanks, Chairperson. I've just got one question to ask. That obviously we realize that there's going to be adjustments with the COVID-19 expenditure, the 500 million that's coming out of the National Fiscus, some of it's being funded through loans and that. My question is quite simply, this division of revenue bill, how secure is the allocation of funding when it comes to the equitable share and to the conditional grants? Is there a possibility that these figures may be changed during a national adjustments budget? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Sonjay, are you back, my leader?
Yes, Honorable Chair. Just one question. I missed the last meeting. It might have been asked, but Honorable Mr. Pillay spoke about the health grant that's called National Tertiary Services Grant, and spoke about the human. The allocation that grant is not allocated to KZN, but he spoke about being rural provinces that are looked at. I'm just want to understand what is rural in this case, because KZN is one of the rural provinces. And then I share the same sentiments with other colleagues. It's worrying, the money that is not spent at the local government level. It's really scary. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Nchangas, how did I jump you?
That's the Chair, but for now, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Zungu.
No, I'm fine, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other colleagues who are part of this meeting, they would need to understand that we as the Finance Portfolio Committee are dealing with this DORA bill for the second time when we are engaging the national. That's why we have got very few issues that wanted to raise from them and all the stuff. They know the meeting that we held last month. So, but there are only two things that I want to confirm with you, Wendy, and your team. The first one is around the question of what Emmanuel raised, the allocation in terms of the formula for education. I wanted to find out if undocumented learners are not shortchanged in the process. I just wanted the confirmation for that, because we have been told by the Department of Education that they have got so many undocumented learners. According to their own assessment, they think that those children are not allocated I wanted to get confirmation around that one. The second one, which is something that is for my own understanding, I heard a rumor that the National Minister for Finance has issued a directive to provincial government around the question of the submission of the annual financial statements to a later date. Can you confirm that, so that we are not seen to be pressurizing our own provincial government departments just for the sake of that? This is what I wanted just to find out. And then Emmanuel raised the issue of KwaZulu-Natal picking up the spending around the issues of conditional grants, except the few. Wanted to indicate to our counterparts in local government that it was not plain sailing. We, as the oversight structures, had to put a lot of pressure on the accounting officers in order to make sure that they accelerate the spending. As Emmanuel is indicating on CAPS and ILIMA, as well as the library grant, that's where we are not getting what we wanted to achieve and all this stuff, but we are waiting to see how will they perform in the audit of 2019-2020. So that's the invitation that we have to the structures in local government that are doing oversight, is to request them to up the game and put more pressure on the accounting officers and officials to spend the money that is allocated to that specific municipality. Because if you don't spend, that money is going to be taken away from you come the allocation of the next financial year. Wendy and your team, if you can respond to the few issues that we have raised.
Thank you very much. With regard to the issue raised about has National Treasury issued a directive about the annual financial statements, and that is indeed correct. There has been such an instruction, and we can share the circular with the committee if so needed. So if you can just indicate if you need a copy of that circular, or whether the Provincial Treasury has got that circular. Then with regard to the undocumented learners, I presume they refer to people without IDs and the like. They do get captured on the LURIT system, and they do get added to the allocation. So the fear that the Provincial Department of Education has got is that we ignore them when we calculate the equitable share is fortunately incorrect. But they do get captured differently in the LURIT system. But when we determine the equitable share, we do count them. But there is also a plea we're trying to get those numbers to be as low as possible. So we know that there's issues with ID documents and the like. So that is important. And then with regard to the question about COVID-19 and the new budget that will be introduced, and whether there could be changes to the provincial equitable share and the provincial conditional grants. And maybe a key point that I need to make here, I mean, the process is still evolving, so we cannot make any promises at this stage, but the President announced that there will be 130 billion reductions to the baselines of national and provinces, and that provinces need to contribute 30 billion. That process is still underway, but the idea is, and that there was also a further announcement that national or local government will get 20 billion. But as I indicated in my presentation, the key focus will be on to see how far we can reprioritize within existing allocations. But there could be some reductions in allocations. For example, certain expenditure couldn't be incurred under the lockdown, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. I mean, you were not allowed to build schools, for example. So there's certain expenditure that will then be deferred because of the lockdown, but some of that expenditure will be cut potentially, but a larger portion of that will be redirected towards COVID expenditure. For example, when schools reopen, a key focus will be to focus on, for example, sanitization, having PPEs in place, and ensuring there's water and sanitation in those schools. So that is why we also ask that we can change the conditional grant frameworks so that the conditions are changed to be COVID responsive. So a lot of that 30 billion reduction that is required will be done through reprioritization. And the same applies to the local government equitable share. Although the work is still underway. Sorry, I forgot to put my face on. A lot of work is still underway to determine how that 20 billion needs to be allocated. But again, a lot of that funding will be secured through reprioritization of existing local government conditional grants. And it's already taking place as we speak as well. For example, if you look at water tankering and tankering, a lot of existing indirect conditional grants have been repurposed to provide emergency water supply to areas that do not have water, for example. The same will be done to transport grants. MIC will also be repurposed to be used towards COVID and the like. So it will be a combination of reprioritization and cuts. But if I can ask the rest of the team to take on the rest of the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just the one question in terms of the National Tertiary Services Grant. So I mentioned that it was for, there is a development component in the grant that caters for rural provinces. So maybe I should just qualify this and say it's also for tertiary hospitals or the tertiary sector in the different provinces. So if you look at the different tertiary hospitals across provinces, KZN along with Western Cape and Gauteng as a highly developed tertiary sector. So they have good tertiary hospitals that can cater for the population in the province. So other provinces, for example, Northwest, doesn't have this, or they don't have the advanced level of care that they need. So in those instances, for example, they have to refer patients to, for example, Gauteng or Free State or whichever province. So that development component is there for just those 4 provinces. So it's not solely on the rural aspect. It's more on the tertiary sector and how advanced it is. And from our perspective, KZN is quite advanced in the tertiary sector. That's why it didn't qualify for the assistance there. Thank you. I don't think I'll respond on the performance. I think the chair has already spoke about it. Thank you.
Very much, Emmanuel, Wendy, and the whole team. Now I want to hand over to the stakeholders that we have been invited so that they pose questions on this DORA bill to the National Treasury official. Want to start with SALGA. Is SALGA represented today in this virtual meeting? When you are coming in, please indicate who you are, the position that you hold in that organization, and which organization you come from. Can we get someone from SALGA? Seems as if SALGA is not having any question, and want to check if there is any question coming from business. Seems as if there is no question. Now I come to the municipalities. I want to start with eThekwini Metro. Do you have any question at eThekwini Metro? Oh, there seems to be no question. I thought the deputy mayor, who is the chairperson of the Finance Portfolio Committee in that the Metro is there. The former MEC for Finance, Honorable B. Scott. I thought she's there. Can we come to Ilembe and other municipalities under Ilembe? Is there any question that you want to pose, especially around the issues of threats of underspending of the budgets and the cut thereof? So Ilembe seems to be comfortable. Can we come to King Cetshwayo district and its constituent municipalities? Is there any question? Hayi inkosi uCetshwayo ayinayo nomasipala uMlalazi awunayo nawo awunawo ama-question. Okay, we are now coming to Zululand district municipality and the municipalities under this district. Ukhona umbuzo. So they are all comfortable. They were intimidated that their grants are going to be cut due to underspending. Can we come to Amajuba district? Is there any question and comment from there? Seems as if there is none. Want to come to Uthugela district. I had one colleague of mine coming from Umsinga. Oh, Mzinyathi, Uthugela Mzinyathi uyangidida. So Uthugela has got no question. Can I come to Umzinyathi and other municipalities falling under that district? Hayi kusho bazwe kahle ukuthi bazothola kanjani bayibonile no iflashwa lapha ku screen. Umgungundlovu district and their local municipalities, any question? Hayi engathi awukho futhi nasemgungundlovu. Bengithi izokhala kodwa umasipala omncane where they are having their monies put on hold. That is Umsunduzi. Ngizange ngifonele abaholi bakhona ukuthi kanjani. Can we come to Ugu district municipality and local municipalities there? Any question? Ogwini?
Nothing so far, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Manyoni. Can we check with Herikwala district and the municipalities in that district? Engathi nakhona ikho imbuzo. So I think we have come to the end of this engagement for the National Division of Revenue Bill. So we are going to process it, Wendy and your team, and definitely sure by tomorrow, the Finance Portfolio Committee of KwaZulu-Natal will be in a position to indicate the position. We wanted the position that will incorporate our other stakeholders, but I can see that as they are silent, they seem to be a bit comfortable with the bill. Did you hear that, Wendy? They feel a bit comfortable, not very comfortable. They're a bit comfortable with the bill. That's the message that I'm getting. Same with the academics. I don't know. I didn't check with the academics. Is there any issue that our friends from the academic fraternity are having? It seems as if there is none. It seems as if, Erwin, tomorrow, my brother, you are going to be getting the mandate from the People's Province of KwaZulu-Natal on this bill. We are going to deal with it immediately after the next item. Wendy and your team, Thank you very much, friends, for engaging with us. It is always a great pleasure to deal with you because you are always honest whenever we are dealing with issues. Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you
the
very
provincial treasurer.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We are now coming to the provincial treasury. I don't know who is going to be briefing us on the bill from the provincial treasury. Earlier on, I saw the name of Lizelle joining us, but I don't know who is going to be briefing us on this bill. You know you have got only 30 minutes. You also understand that we are clued up as the Finance Portfolio Committee on the bill, but for the sake of the stakeholders who would want you to make that presentation, we're handing over to the provincial treasury. Please show your face when you speak because we're on YouTube. Thank you very much, provincial treasury.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning to you and to the rest of the Finance Portfolio honorable members, as well as the honorable councillors who are joining us this morning and the colleagues, as well as those who are from the academic fraternity. My name is Nomthandazo Mjuza. I am responsible for the provincial budget management, the preparation of the budget, as well as the monitoring of the budget. So I am the director in the public finance unit of the provincial treasury. Hopefully I am audible, and Spamadla is going to project the presentation. I do not see it on my screen, but I hope everybody can see it. Before I continue, can I get a confirmation, Spamadla, that you are ready on your side?
He is ready together with me. He is ready.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Honorable Chair. I don't see it on my screen, so I will continue with an assumption that everyone who is joining us is able to see our presentation. We started off with a slide where we show that the 2020 appropriation bill, which is what I'm presenting, is required to be presented into this House, to the legislature, and be engaged because of the requirement that is in our constitution that no monies may be drawn from the Provincial Revenue Fund without having not been appropriated in terms of this bill. But also in terms of Section 26 of the Public Finance Management Act, it does require that the provincial legislature must appropriate money for each financial year for the requirements of the province. And so that is why we are dealing with this bill. And as the Finance Chair has mentioned, that we have tabled the budget on the 6th of March, and there was a presentation to the Finance Portfolio Committee on the 10th of March in terms of what was contained in the bill as well as in the budget. Our colleagues have mentioned, my next slide, I'm on slide number 3, moving to 4, which talks about the changes to the provincial equitable share. Our colleagues from National Treasury in their presentation, they've just mentioned that there were changes to the provincial equitable share. And I just want to mention that we did, as a province, have cuts when we began this financial year. And these cuts were as a result of the formula itself, which is the equitable share, was updated with our numbers. And in terms of numbers, also back to the question that you asked, Honorable Chair, about education, of the view that their numbers are not reflected. And I think the answer that was given by National Treasury is quite accurate. And it should be mentioned that we are seeing that a number of schools in the rural areas are considered, they are now considered to be unsustainable. So the numbers, or the learner numbers in those rural schools, has dropped. Of course, what you find in KZN is that in some areas or in the urban space, you will find that there will be overcrowding, whilst in the rural space, you find that there is space for the learners, and in fact, some schools have become unsustainable to continue. The issue is that the learner numbers
numbers in Gauteng has surpassed KZN, and so that's why we are losing our portion of the equitable share. As it has been mentioned, the equitable share is heavily determined by the population numbers, and so that's one of the things that our provincial Department of Education is wrestling with. And as such, we have lost 998 million in this financial year. Next financial year was 1.6 billion and 2.8 billion over the MTF, just because our population numbers are reducing, and mainly from the education numbers, the learner numbers, as well as the health component, the number of patients who are using our hospitals. The total budget cut, therefore, for the province was a 2 billion, 2.7 billion and 3.3 billion over the MTF. So we started this financial year with this challenge of dealing with this equitable share cut as well as the fiscal consolidation cuts. I haven't mentioned the fiscal consolidation cuts, but it comes back to what our colleague from National was mentioning, that as a country we are having high levels of debt, which are considered unsustainable by some, and as such the National Treasury has been on a drive to do fiscal consolidation, which is really reducing expenditure across government. As such, there's been cuts in the budgets so that we reduce our expenditure in line with the fact that our revenue has been growing in very slow growth because of the economy. And we know that if the economy is not performing well, the revenue that the National Treasury raises is quite small. So therefore, expenditure must be in line with the performance of revenue. So on slide 5, what we were showing there is how the cuts were allocated to all of the different departments. We have 15 departments for those who are not part of our sector, and you can see there how we have apportioned the cuts. And you see that the biggest departments will take the biggest cut. So Department of Education as well as Health, they took the biggest cut, and this is because it is in proportion to the allocation of the equitable share that they get. So education and health, they take 75% of our equitable share in the province. And so it only makes sense that when we get a cut, because let me make an example, the education cut of Departments of Education cut for 2020 was 465 million. And if you had to take that 465 million to a small department like agriculture or even provincial treasury, it would really make the department not sustainable because it already has a small budget compared to education. So I'm just explaining that so that those who might not be aware how it works, it is based on the allocations that already each department has as a proportion to the total allocation in the province. Slide number 6. We're just mentioning that although we had cuts from National Treasury, there were some additions that were given and for specific things. So the first one, we allocated money, and this was for social development, where it received 8.8 million, 10.3 million, and 10.8 million over the MTF. These funds are to help the province to continue to employ the additional social workers recruited in 1920 to deal with the high prevalence of gender-based violence, substance abuse, and issues affecting children. Social development also received 16.9 million, 20.9 million, as well as 21.9 over the MTF for the province to continue to support NPOs implementing social behavioral change programs to address the social and structural drivers of diseases such as HIV, TB, and sexually transmitted infections. I think I must mention here, honorable members and colleagues, that what we're dealing with and what we're presenting, of course, this was before COVID became an epidemic. So as you could see, that the allocations that were given to social development, it was just to address those areas that were considered a challenge at the beginning of this financial year. And of course, since the the spread of COVID and the national lockdown, social development is now needing social workers to help with shelters, to help with provision of food parcels and the likes. And in that sense, I must just mention that there are 3 departments that are considered to be having budget pressures as they seek to respond to COVID-19. Social development is one of them, and the other is education and health. And also, I must also just mention here is that in my presentation, I have not made mention of the fact that when the president made the announcement of the support, of the economic support, that 500 billion, that 30 billion, as Wendy has mentioned, is going to come from provinces, and provincial treasuries portion of the 30 billion, it is quite significant because we are the second largest recipient of equitable share. Currently, members and even the finance portfolio should be aware that we are currently working on reprioritizing our budgets in the province, and I think at some stage that information will come and the presentation will come back to this committee to look at where we now need to stop certain things and also reprioritize savings where there are savings because of the lockdown in order to assist the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and even social development. So I'm just mentioning there that in social development also they are looking within their budget to come up with savings in order to deal with some of the challenges that they now face with as a result of COVID. Okay, so in that slide 6, one of the departments that received an additional amount was education. It was for them to continue with the sanitary dignity project in schools. Now, slide 7 is just to talk about the fiscal framework of the province, where we show that the whole budget of the province mainly comes from equitable share and conditional grants. We have a very small, well, not an allocation, but a source of revenue called provincial cash resources. That's where we have our own revenue, generate our own revenue as a province, mainly from the Department of Transport, from Department of Economic Development through gambling boards. So there is a bit of money that comes from those entities. I must also mention that the contingency reserve for the province was at 390 million, I beg your pardon, when it was set over the MTF. And this is quite lesser compared to how we normally prefer as a province to set our contingency reserve, which is normally at 600 million, because the contingency reserve helps the province in cases where we have unforeseen expenditure, maybe because of storms that we've had in the province in the past couple of years, where we've had to respond into emergency situations and there's no money coming from national, we will always go to that contingency reserve. But because this year we've had the cuts that I've just mentioned, it was lowered, that contingency reserve, to that amount of 390. There were in slide 8, I'm now on slide 8. In slide 8, there were some additions to departments or allocations that we gave to departments from our provincial cash resources. I must just mention that when we have underspending from the previous financial year, underspending from the equitable share, not the underspending from conditional grants. The conditional grants is dealt with in a different framework. The DORA allows us to make submissions to National Treasury where money is committed. So there's a separate process. But where there's underspending on equitable share, we assess it, and in some instances we don't give rollovers to departments, and that money will be on the provincial revenue fund. And we then use it to fund some pressures that departments have. So I must just mention that there were 9 departments that were funded for various things. Like, for example, we have an issue with learner transport in the province. The need far exceeds the budget. What we do as a provincial treasury is that whenever there's extra money, we provide money to the Department of Transport in order to deal with the need. In this case, they were given 136 million. But also, we also help with the Department of Public Works, because it has been seen that some of its properties in municipalities have increased such that they are not able to meet the property rates demand, and so they would ask for money, and so we do provide that in the budget whenever there is allocation. But I must also mention that because of the budget cuts, how they were funded, a majority of the provincial cash resources was used to meet the cuts. As you could see there, we provided 306 million and 969 for the cuts. And there was a 50 million provided to Office of the Premier for the KZN Youth Empowerment Fund. That is to help the youth in the province who are wanting to start businesses to apply. And also the 8 million that was made to the provincial legislature to help them with challenges that they had in terms of their job evaluation results. Now I'm going to move to slide number 10, where we now show what different departments' expenditure or the budget was at the beginning when we prepared this bill. The total budget for 2020, of course, is 138 billion. And as you could see there, you can then see how different departments were allocated. But of course, we can just mention for those who might not know that education received the highest allocation of 57 billion and health received 48 billion. But mostly those two departments, they use their allocation for employee costs, meaning it is for teachers. Like education has about 117,000 staff complement, and health as well has a high number of staff complement. So those budgets are mainly for staff, and also those two departments, it must be mentioned, they've always complained about the fact that the budgets are not adequate to deal with the challenges that they have in their sectors. But that is how the budget was, and we provided it over the MTEF, as you could see there. On slide number 11, okay, I think that's where I've just mentioned that education received the lion's share of the budget, which was at 41.4%, followed by health at 34%. The three social services departments, which is education, health, and social development, jointly received 79% of the provincial budget. So the rest of the 12 departments split, they received the 21% split among them, the 12. So the details of what each vote will spend in their budget is contained in our green book. So we've got a green book where the whole budget is and detailing how each department will spend its budget. Now, in terms of the appropriation bill, we have taken what relates to each department. So in slide 12, as you could see, that's just what is in the appropriation bill for the Department of the Office of the Premier. So in there, you can see the Department of the Office of the Premier has 3 programs. So it has administration, it has institutional development, it has policy governance. And then you can see for each program how much has been allocated. But then there will be specific allocations that we always want users of the appropriation bill to be aware of specific allocations. For example, in Program 2 for the Office of the Premier, we have a specific allocation there, which is the repairs to the Moses Mabhida building, where Treasury provided 6.9 million for those repairs, but also for the KZN Youth Empowerment Fund, which I've just mentioned that they were allocated 50 million. So that is done so that we can track those allocations and against expenditure so that the money doesn't just get used for other things, but you can see what is specifically allocated, and then you can ask for even reports on those specific allocations. But also in Program 3, there's an allocation for the Zulu Royal House Trust, which is 21.36 million. I think I must just mention the impacts of the cuts. That's slide number 13. So the Office of the Premier is that they received a reduction of 2.3 million, 11.6 million, and 16.17 million over the MTF. They were largely affected against goods and services. Contractors is for events. And the impact of this cut is that the department over the MTF, they reduced their events budget against goods and services on programs 1 and 3, as well as a cut against computer services and consultants. They also reduced their goods and services, the reduction in their goods and services contractors will mean a reduction in the number and size of events, okay, which is good. And other matters is that there's a high spending on events by the department, which continues to put pressure. So how the cuts were affected, they were affected on events, and I think that means that the department must manage the size and also how it delivers events. I think whilst we're speaking about events, of course, honorable members and our honorable guests, is that because of the COVID-19, we do see that our provincial government will have to. That's one of the areas that will have savings, because according to the requirements is that people should not be meeting in groups. So I do not foresee any events actually in the next whole financial year. So there will be some significant savings there. And I think as Treasury, that's one of the areas that we're looking at currently, as we are currently making some calculations in order to respond to what the President has said, where some cuts have to be made to the provincial budget in order to reprioritize for health and education. Slide number 14, that's for legislature. It has just 2 programs. It does not have any specific allocations, and that can be said. But in terms of what the cut was for them, it was 1.7, I'm on slide 15, it was 1.7 million, 8.4 million, and 12 million. And these cuts were effected against program 1 and 2, against consultants costs, advertising, catering costs, travel, and subsistence. Of course, because of the lockdown, those areas should have savings in this financial year. And they also foresaw that they will have less public participation events in order to have savings. And there were also some reductions against the statutory members' remuneration. I think it was about 700,000, and it was likely that there would be no impact as a result of that cut. The next department, or rather before, on slide 6, is that we're noting that the upgrading of existing posts was finalized by the legislature in April 2019, and 12 critical vacant posts were advertised in 1920. And they were at various stages of recruitment process, and hence the posts are likely to be filled in 2021. And the compensation budget will need to be reviewed, though, by the legislature over the MTF to ensure that the growth is sufficient to fill critical posts, and they'll need to consider internal reprioritization. And they were also given an additional 17 million that was allocated in the adjustments budget for the roof repairs to the main chamber of the legislature building. And that construction work commenced in March, and the repairs are expected to be completed this year in August. I don't know whether they will be affected by the current lockdown or not, but that is what we had in March when we were preparing this budget. Slide number 17 is on agriculture. Agriculture has 3 programs as well, and it has a couple of specific allocations, some of which are conditional grants, as you could see there, but I wanted just to highlight that there's a specific allocation that goes to ADA, which is Agribusiness Development Agency, and that's an agency that belongs to the department. Other than that, the allocations are for each a program within the department, and it is for various things, for salaries and for the programs that the department is implementing. But I wanted just to mention, like as I've been mentioning for all of them, is that there were cuts even against this department. It had a reduction of 26 million, 54, as well as 62 million over the MTF. And they effected the cuts against compensation of employees, and as well as against goods and services, for interventions such as the provision of seeds and fertilizers as well, and also against transfers and subsidies to departmental agencies and accounts. And again, as we mentioned, I mean, things have changed because of COVID, so there will be, like, even for filling of posts, I guess it is difficult at this moment for government to hold interviews and to fill some of the posts. So there will be some saving from filling of posts, and in that sense, even the impact of the budget cuts will be felt less likely. I'm on program slide number 19 on Vote For, which is economic development. It has quite a lot of programs that department. Because we have colleagues from municipal space, I wanted just to flag the allocations that are given to municipalities by the economic development. So there is on program 2 an allocation to Zululand for the Guama Jomela Light Manufacturing Center for 6 million. There is also an allocation from program 3 to the Rain Konyene municipality for the Market Airport, 4 million. Mgungundlovu District Municipality for the Pietermaritzburg Airport, Kanyagode District Municipality for the Mkuze. And also, okay, and then there's allocations to the different entities of the department, because the department has a number of entities. Some of them is Dube Trade Port, it is KZN Film Commission. So in the bill, we show how much is allocated for each entity. Can I also go to slide 20, where we show program 6 and 7? There's allocation to Okahlamba there for the Drakensberg extravaganza event, and also allocation to the KwaZulu-Natal Tourism Authority as well as the Sharks Board. In program 7, there's an allocation to Ezemvelo as well as for the invasive alien species program, where the department needs to deal with the invasive alien species program, and also allocations for some entities that do research, like the South African Association for Marine Biological Research, the Wildlife Environmental Society of South Africa, as well as for the invasive alien species program. So that is program, that is Board 4, which is economic development. They also had a reduction in their budget of 73 million, 113 million and 133 of the MTF, which was affected against compensation of employees as well as goods and services, and against public entities. So the department had planned to fill a number of posts, so I think the delays will result in some savings, and also some infrastructure projects against the Dube Trade Port as well as the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone will no longer take place as initially planned as a result of the cuts. Program 5 is education, and education has 7 programs. It has allocations for each sub-program, but below each sub-program, there's specific allocations. Like for instance, in program 1, there's allocation to improve infrastructure support, where they're giving money to appoint people to help them with improving infrastructure support. Not just any people, but these are skilled individuals in the built environment sector. So they've got 13 million to do that. On program 2, they've got conditional grants that they have, but also the sanitary dignity project that we've received allocation from National Treasury. We are showing it as a specific allocation so that we can track it. On program 4, there's an allocation for a grant for learners with profound intellectual disabilities. Program 6, there's allocation for the education infrastructure grant, with also an allocation specifically for maintenance in schools. And program 7, it is examination, and they've got a grant on HIV and AIDS. In terms of the cuts that were effected, they did impact a number of important areas in the Department of Education, because the cut, as I've mentioned, was 169 million, 829 million, and 1.1 billion over the MTF. So it is quite significant. And the department effected the entire cut against program 2, which is a sub-program responsible for public primary level, and against compensation of employees. So this would result in the unaffordability of 2,173 posts. And these posts are mainly reserved when there's a need for temporary and substitute educators in situation where the educator is on maternity leave. And this was because the department said to us that they have no other place where they can effect the cut, and because also the cut is quite significant. And another area that is of concern is the fact that the department's allocation for norms and standard per learner is quite low. It is at 955 per learner in 2021, while the recommended national funding norm is 1.4 for quintals 1 to 3. The fee-paying schools in quintals 4 and 5 are funded at 522 and 179 per learner, compared to the recommended national norm of 735 and 254. And this is something that the department is very aware of, but because of budget pressure, they have not been able to meet this norm. And of course, COVID-19 has had significant impact to the department. So what I'm saying here, this situation is really evolving, because now the department is now forced to provide extra teachers, is now forced to provide extra learning classrooms, and provide for all of the hygienic requirements as required by COVID. So that's why we're saying that we're in a process of looking at reprioritizing budgets even from other departments in order to be able to help departments such as health and education in these areas of budget pressure. The next department will be Vote 6, which is the Treasury, one of the small departments. It has 5 programs. And I think a specific allocation there is on program 2 for the infrastructure development improvement. They were given money by National Treasury so that they could set up an infrastructure team that helps department in terms of infrastructure challenges that it has. So that team is called the CREP team. And so there's an allocation there for 5 million to be able to do that. In terms of the cuts, what Treasury did is they effected their cuts against goods and services in Program 1 against consultants for special projects, and that will have an impact on the projects that they wanted to do. I think one of the projects was the Operation Clean Audit campaign and improving the audit outcomes of the province. So they now need to look at how, they can implement their projects within the revised allocations. Program 7 is the Department of Health. It has 8 programs and is one of the biggest, and it has different allocations from conditional grants that I'm not going to mention specifically, but I must just mention any specific allocation. It's actually nothing specific except for the grants. As you could all see, the grants across all 8 programs. And how the department was affected by the cuts, it had a reduction of 119 million, 588 million, as well as 846 million over the MTF. And they effected this cuts across all 8 programs, largely against compensation of employees, with minor cuts against goods and services and machinery and equipment. The reduction in compensation of employees will impact the department's ability to fill critical posts, such as medical specialists. And again, health and education are similar because of the pressures that they have, in any case, in filling posts in hospitals, and the fact that the budgets are being reduced. They have no other place to cut except compensation of employees. And again, the situation is changing for them because of the COVID-19. They now need to provide more nurses and provide more healthcare workers. And so, as you would have heard earlier from Wendy, is that there was an allocation before the end of the financial year for COVID-19. So that is to help them with the pressures, but also with the reprioritization that is currently being undertaken. We are looking at how can their pressures on employees be taken into account, but also just on the PPEs and also getting an extra space in hospitals for a possible outbreak of the COVID-19. I won't go through the other matters. We could have a look at there, but also human settlements. They've got 4 programs and they've got conditional grants to implement government programs. So those conditional grants will be things like title deeds restoration program and the human settlements development grant, where there's a portion of it that goes to municipalities. They are accredited municipalities. I think in the province, those are 6. The biggest municipalities, eThekwini, Watuguza, and Newcastle, I think, that help the department in the implementation of the housing policy across the province. In terms of how the cuts were effected by the department, they had a cut of 3.1 million on slide 31 and 8.5 million, 12.3 million. And the cuts were effected against goods and services on property payments, against transfers and subsidies, and against compensation of employees. And the department indicated that the cuts will affect how they are able to fill posts, but they would, of course, review this. And as I've mentioned, because of COVID, things will change a bit. And also an amount of 400 million is allocated for the construction and repair of houses in the eThekwini Metro for 2021. And this was ring-fenced within the HSDG grant. And also of the 100 million transferred to Itala for the construction of houses for military veterans in 1617, only 9.2 million had been spent to date due to the fact that the program is still experiencing challenges in acquiring sites from municipalities, as well as the verification of beneficiaries by the Department of Military Veterans. So those are some of the things that we wanted to highlight for this department when we were preparing the budget. Community safety, one of the smallest departments, has 2 programs, and its total budget is 249 million. And it has 1 grant, which is the social sector EPWP grant. It didn't have any specific allocations from the Treasury. And in terms of the cuts, their cut was 1.5 million, 4.6 million, and 5.3 over the 3 years. And they effected it against compensation of employees, as well as against goods and services, where they will reduce costs on venues and facilities, catering costs, as well as transport costs. And the department indicated that these budget cuts should not adversely affect service delivery, which is good to hear. Sports and recreation had 2 programs with their total budget of 481. They've got 2 grants, if I'm not mistaken, one mass participation and sports development grant. And yes, and also they spent on maintenance of sport facilities in municipalities. So they've allocated 52 million that they transfer to municipalities to help with the maintenance of sports facilities. The cuts of 25 million, 33 million, and 31 million against the department were effected against compensation of employees, against goods and services, where the department will reduce the number of events, major events they hold, like the provincial and national tournaments, the indigenous games and championships, and they also reduce by 1 million transfers to non-profit institutions for sports and recreation federations. And of course, because of COVID, some sports events won't be held, so this department or this outlook is likely to change. Other matters is that we noted that the department had budgeted for growth of 8.7 million, 8.7%, 6.7%, and 6.9% against compensation of employees, and wanted to fill 36 critical posts. However, the growth was not sufficient. But then again, I think the picture would definitely change now because of COVID and the fact that there will be slow filling of posts in any case because of the national lockdown. COGTA has 4 programs, and it has some conditional grants, but also it has some specific allocated funding where it gives some money to municipalities, for example, for ward-based plans, as well as for the scheme support program and for the SDF programs, as well as the remuneration of his Induna is shown there as a specific allocation, and also a donation to the Dembe Trust. In terms of the cuts, the department would have effected their cuts of 13 million, 20 million, and 22 million, mainly against filling of posts, and as well as some reduction in terms of how much they want to transfer to municipalities. And I must just mention, since we're dealing with the issues of transfers by COGTA to municipalities and linking to what our colleagues from National Treasury have said, even the transfers that COGTA has made to municipalities, we are noting that they are being underspent. And the other day I was looking at transfers that were made by COGTA to municipalities in 2018-19. There were still some of those allocations not spent. Of course, we just finished 2019. We're writing reports on expenditure, and some of the 1920 allocations by COGTA to municipalities has not been spent. And I think that's one area of concern, and we are currently even engaging with the department, because when we are facing cuts in order to reprioritize to health, we need to look at some areas where we can find money. And I think for me, that's one reasonable area where you can easily find money, because it's not being spent. But in any case, because of the lockdown, it will even be more difficult to spend that money by municipalities. So I think that's one area that COGTA has to look at in terms of the amounts that they transfer to municipalities and the fact that they're slow or poor spending by municipalities. We also wanted to note that the department was undertaking a water, sanitation, and electricity backlog study, where they wanted to then have interventions and to help municipalities. Again, issues of water, sanitation, and electricity, those are municipal space issues, but the department is assisting there because of the need. And there was also a contingency liability for the back pay office in Duna, which was sitting at 2.6 billion. However, because of challenges with funding, that is something that was there, and that the province did not have money to deal with. And yes, it needed further engagement. Vote 12 or Department of Transport has 5 programs, and it also has some specific allocations like the learner transport, which is on program 3, where it has a budget of 366 million, and that budget on its own is also not complete to meet the need. And as I've mentioned earlier, they are giving money whenever the Treasury is able to afford additional funding to help them with the need. And of course, that's one area that's going to be under pressure now when the schools eventually open, because there should be social distancing. It will mean that there should be more buses transporting kids. Where one bus was able to transport 50 or 60 kids, now you will need another one so that there's social distancing. I think those things that's what the department is currently looking at, and together with us to see how it can reprioritize to meet the need. In terms of the cuts that were effected against the departments, they were effected against compensation of employees, and as well as they will impact on the road maintenance projects, as well as some planned projects, and also on goods and services. However, because of the situation changing, and I think some infrastructure projects are moving at a slow pace because of the lockdown, so things should change compared to how they were presented by the department at the beginning of the year. I think in terms of other matters that we wanted to note is that there's been a huge delay in filling posts in the department due to the non-approval of the revised organizational structure. But also the department has mentioned that in a number of instances where it wanted to fill posts, there's been a challenge with finding suitable skills, because you would understand that they're looking for engineers and people who have qualifications in the built environment. And even those that they do find, you find that they complain about the salaries not being adequate, or they easily leave again in the system. So the department has been having challenges in filling their posts. They've also had a shortfall in learner transport, as I've mentioned. And in fact, let me mention that they are currently providing for 58,908 learners, while there's 176,156 learners that are eligible to receive the transport. So it means 117,248 learners are not being catered for. So that's quite a high number. So that means there is a shortfall in terms of providing for this service. And as I mentioned, where Treasury is able to provide additional funding from underspending by other departments, we have been doing so in the adjustments budget. Vote 13, or social development. In terms of the appropriation bill, they've got 5 programs, and they've got a number of conditional grants and also specific allocations, because for them, they show how they spend in terms of services for older persons, services for persons with disabilities, allocations for HIV and AIDS, and also the specific allocations that were given by National Treasury there, like the Nawango court case, to deal with the challenges around the social worker grant. They were given money by National Treasury to appoint social workers. There's been a challenge where there's a whole number of graduates of social workers who were given, some of them were given bursaries by the social development department, but they could not be absorbed by the department because of budget pressure. So we're giving money. We just wanted to show that there's 66 million just for the appointment of social workers to the department, and that money was given by National Treasury. There's other allocations such as the ECD and partial care, child and youth care. So all of that is in my presentation that anyone who's interested can have a look at the details of what is given. Because of the interest of time, I won't go through the detail. In terms of the cuts that affected the department, they were effected against compensation of employees across all 5 programs. And the filling of posts also in this department has been taking long. And in some instances, they've mentioned that whenever they send out an application, they receive a request to fill posts. They receive like 60 or 50,000 applicants. And so to go through the sifting process, because in government, you need to sift, you need to interview and go through that whole process, it does take them quite a long time. So they were seeing that they were not going to fill some of the posts this year, so they effected the cut against the COE. And in fact, as a matter that we have raised here is that the department plans to fill 205 critical posts in 2021, and they've got a growth there of 11.8%. And also they've got 25 million that has been allocated against the fight against GBV, gender-based violence and STIs, as well as for the employment of social workers in hotspots where there's a high prevalence. As I've mentioned, this allocation came from National Treasury. And also the department will continue to increase access to ECD for poor children through conditional grant funding and with continued implementation of the mobile ECD program. Again, because of the COVID, a whole lot of things are going to change even for this sector. Public Works has 3 programs, and it doesn't have many allocations that are specific allocations, but there is an allocation given to municipalities for the property rates. We have 663 million there. Also, property rates, as I've mentioned, there's one area of pressure for this department because of how municipalities in the past have increased the property rates for government. And so when Provincial Treasury has extra money, we do allocate extra funding to this department to deal with the pressure. In terms of other allocations, there's money for GIAMA, which is Government Immovable Asset Management Act, with the 17 million. There's also allocation for fixed asset register, as well as the GIAMA conditional grants. And those projects actually, they've been, for the honorable members of finance, they would know that those programs have been moving quite slow in terms of implementation by the department. In program 3, and they've got an allocation they've received from National Treasury in terms of improving infrastructure. So they also have some responsibility to coordinate infrastructure for the whole province, and so they were giving allocations to help them to be able to do that. In terms of how they affected the cut of their 13.8 million, 35 million, and 43 million, they affected it against building and fixed structures, where they will cap some internal capital projects from being rolled out, and they will do so in terms of a phasing process. And they will also no longer be able to put trackers on the department's vehicles, and they will also effect cuts against machinery and equipment, resulting in fewer purchases of department vehicles. In terms of other matters, we noted that the shortfall in municipal property rates, which is something that I've mentioned that has been a concern, and whenever we have funding, we give it to them. The last department, Arts and Culture, has 3 programs, and I just want to highlight in program 2 that they have an allocation where they transfer money to municipalities for the museum subsidies as 14 million, but they also have transfers to municipalities for the operational costs for art centers as 1.9 million. They have an allocation to the Playhouse Company of 9.6 million, as well as to their entity, which is the Karen Amman Institute, which used to be under Office of the Premier, which is now with Arts and Culture. In program 3, they've got the Community Library Services Grant, where they transfer some of that to municipalities. 54 million is transferred to municipalities. And there's also some allocation for the provincialization of libraries of 202 million. In terms of how this department have dealt with the cuts of 46 million, 28 million, and 22 million, they've effected those against compensation of employees across all programs, as well as goods and services, to cut departmental events, as well as against transfers to municipalities of 1.4 million cut against the provincialization of libraries. And then the implication of this cut to municipalities is that there will be lesser operational costs funded. And there was a cut as well against departmental agencies and accounts, program 2, where the cut was effected against the Playhouse Company and AMAFA, and it will affect the those 2 departments, 2 entities. But also transfers to non-profit institutions was reduced by a small amount of 150, which is a transfer to KZN Philharmonic Orchestra, and also buildings and other fee structures. There was a reduction which will affect the construction of libraries in Mzumbe, Mbali, and Daleni. Other matters that we wanted to highlight is that the various infrastructure projects bids were cancelled as a result of various STM discrepancies. This resulted in funds being suspended from the department for the infrastructure projects, such as the archive repository, the refurbishment of the Winston Churchill Theatre, Music Academy in Ladysmith, and the Osizweni Arts Center. In addition, the department is currently projecting to underspend. In fact, as I did the cabinet memo the other day on budget spending as the end of March, the department did underspend because of these challenges as a result of their SCM unit. So that's one area that they need to look at, their SCM as well as their infrastructure units. And that, honorable members, I almost said it brings me to the end, but I think I have two more slides. There's one on infrastructure where we can see the picture for the province, that we have a total 13.8 billion budget for infrastructure spread across different departments, which is good. There's been a slight increase, although there's been budget cuts, and of course, because of COVID, I do foresee that our infrastructure implementation will be affected. And so I think we just note that this is what we had when we were preparing this bill, and that's what we are tabling to this members and the stakeholders. So that brings me to the end, honorable members and our stakeholders. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mchuza, for this presentation, detailed as it was. Would want to indicate to the stakeholders that the MEC for Finance in March 2020, he tabled the budget to the House, and the Speaker of the Legislature referred that budget for processing by the Finance Portfolio Committee. We want to account to all of you stakeholders that we as the Finance Portfolio Committee concluded the processing of the budget, and we are ready at any time to table the report to the House and persuade them to support or reject the budget. So we are ready. We have been ready. Through virtual meetings during the times of the lockdown, we're processing that particular budget. But we wanted for you to get the picture of the provincial budget. Services that we deliver as the provincial government are delivered to your own municipalities. You have been given the budget of 138 billion, 182 million odd for the utilization in the 2020-2021 financial year. You have even realized that with the COVID-19 crisis, money that we have put aside for any emergencies in KwaZulu-Natal is a mere 390 million rand. You can see the challenges that all of us are having. This is in line with the presentation that was made by the National Treasury of the Republic of South Africa. So we as the Finance Portfolio Committee are not going to do anything or comment or do anything with this presentation, because we have processed it and we are ready, and we have taken very sound resolutions that will ensure that the shortcomings in the spending of the provincial government budgets are addressed. This is what we have done. So wanted to find out from the stakeholders if they have got any comment. Any stakeholder, I don't want to go to the list anymore. I'm quite happy that the councillors are still in part of the meeting, and other guests, they are still part of the meeting. We really appreciate that, because we are getting the exact picture as to what type of budget are we having for KwaZulu-Natal in 2020-2021. So wanted to find out if there's any stakeholder who would want to comment on this draft budget that is presented to you. Anyone, stakeholders? Were you comfortable? But the lady was making a presentation. She's very, very good in the presentation. as she introduced herself, she's one of the officials of the provincial treasury in the budget office. She is scrutinizing the budget and whatever. You could hear the jibe around the issues of COGTA budget that is sent to your own municipalities, that it is showing underspending. Councillor Sithi Dlamini, do you want to say something, my brother or sister?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much to the presentation made. We also appreciate being invited to be part of this meeting. We are disappointed as a local government that how much we contribute in the reduction of fund in the provincial of KwaZulu-Natal fiscus, which is not good. We are also appreciate that you have given us an opportunity of having a closer look on how much do we need to do in ensuring that we are trying by all means to reduce the challenges in the relation to expenditure, and trust that we will do as much as we can in assisting the government, because what is happening is that we are depriving our communities in terms of service delivery. I just wanted to make those comments, and I'm sure we will all agree that the presentation that has been done is a presentation that can take our country forward. There is only one area where I am not convinced in relation to equitable share. That is the province of KwaZulu-Natal. I've noticed that it is the second lowest in terms of a percentage, which I did not understand the reasons behind that. If that clarity could be given, I'm sure I will benefit out of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sithi Dlamini. Is there any other colleague who want to comment on the budget or ask a question?
Chairperson, are you allowing for members of the committee as well?
Honorable Member, you are allowed to make any comment or question.
Thanks, Chairperson. If there are no members outside of the committee, then I would like to make a comment.
Feel free, make a comment, and other members, while you are still brainstorming your own question, will allow everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Governor.
Thanks, Chairperson. Chairperson, I wanted to just highlight the point, because this is a public hearing, that this budget was drawn at a time when the matters of the COVID-19 pandemic were not at the forefront of but that situation has now changed. So whilst this budget is going to be tabled, and as has been pointed out, there clearly will be serious changes, and there would have to be an adjustment budget tabled. So I think members of the public need to understand that this budget is going to be very, very seriously amended to accommodate the requirements of COVID-19. But having said that, Chairperson, I also want to raise the matter that because of the under-expenditure of several departments, there are funds within departments that can be reprioritized towards the COVID-19 spending. And I would not call them savings, because they are under expenditure. For example, compensation of employees is not a saving. it means that posts were not filled. And whilst in a way it can assist now, it doesn't take away the fact that those posts would have been intended for service delivery purposes and they have not been filled. I'm using that as an example. But the matter that I also wanted to raise, Chairperson, and we haven't had feedback on it, I suppose when we get the presentation by individual departments, we'll hear more. But it is of concern that, we need to focus our efforts on funding the COVID-19 pandemic requirements. But at the same time, there are other requirements as well. For example, in the Department of Health, the vaccination programs, the other programs that are the normal programs of the department should not suffer, because you don't want to, sort out Peter and then you are causing a problem for Paul. I'm thinking specifically of vaccinations and inoculations that are the normal programs of departments, but which I'm not hearing much about now. Then in the Department of Education, the School Nutrition Program, NSNP, which catered for meals for literally hundreds of thousands of children in the province. That program has not been operating, understandably so, but there are funds via a conditional grant that had been allocated there. We would need to see what the plan is to assist those learners, whether in the form of food packages or whatever. But those are things that when this adjustment budget comes in, would have to feature. And of course, the reprioritization of funds from other departments. We're aware of the cancellation of many events. So there are funds that have been freed up. There are also funds that have been freed up because there's a limit on traveling and subsistence and accommodation. So, there have been more funds released within government departments as well. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Is there any other comment from any Honorable Member or guest?
Yes, Honorable Chair.
Yes, sir.
Honorable Chair, I concur with the Honorable Governor, and thanks for the good presentation from Mr. Mpuza. Just, I take the comments that the chair has made in terms of us as portfolio committee may have made our comments and reports on this issue. And I take the comment also that says, suggests that, well, with the events not taking place, we might see savings. I just wanted to highlight one area, Chair, that see, there is an event that is funded by two departments. There is money that is transferred by, if you look at the Green Book, that is transferred by Economic Development to Okatamba for the event that is called Drakensberg Extravaganza. Then there is Arts and Culture also. If you look at the Green Book, 678 is funding the same event to the tune of about 4 million rand. Economic Development is transferring this money to the municipality to the tune of 6 point something million rand. I might have missed the discussion on this issue. It does sound like there's a double dipping there of one event, which is funded more than 10 million rand basically from the provincial departments. And I think that treasurer might have to look at that. I don't know when this event takes place. It might not happen this year, but it's an area that needs to be looked at, how these departments fund same events. The one comment that I would want to make as well, Chair, is this learner transport grant. I don't know whether Ms. Mpuza is able to I know that we lament about this grant as KwaZulu-Natal. I don't know what formula is used, either by the national or the province. It does seem to me there is unfairness in terms of how this grant is allocated to provinces. If you compare KwaZulu-Natal, and all other provinces. It seems that KZN is short-changed on that grant. It's an area that we might have to, when we look at it next year, we might have to look at how honestly this grant, because I think in terms of how our learners are traveling, they are traveling even longer distance than other provinces, but the money, I do not know whether it is an issue that has to do with learners' birth certificates and IDs. Because if that's the case, then the department will have to seriously look at how then they deal with that issue between Department of Home Affairs and Department of Education, so that this issue is addressed. It has been a sore point for the province for a long time now. I think it would be fair that that matter is looked at. I think we are underfunded, hugely underfunded on this grant than other provinces. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Rogers, you wanted to speak, my leader.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Treasury. The additional 6.2 billion rand cuts that we have to cut our budgets by, what is the process that's being followed by Treasury there? Is there a timeline? And exactly how will that process of the budget cuts be rolled out? If I could just get some clarity there. Thank you, Chair.
Full member wants to raise an issue so that I hand over to the Provincial Treasury to respond. It seems as if there is no one. My sister, Mr. Dlamini, Councillor Dlamini, wanted to find out why KwaZulu-Natal's equitable share is almost the lowest after the Eastern Cape, which is 4-point-something. Ourselves, our equitable share is at 5.2%. Yet the Western Cape is 7.2% and Gauteng 8.2%. That's why Gauteng is going to overtake us in the new financial year, moving from 121 billion to more than 127 billion rand, if I'm not mistaken, when I saw the slide when the National Treasury was presenting. Can we respond, my lady?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Councillor Dlamini and even honourable members, maybe starting back to what you're saying now, Honourable Chair, the numbers that you are quoting, the 5.2% and the 7-something, those are the increases on our equitable share. So our increases from one year to the other were low because what has been happening is that National Treasury has been effecting, we call it like a steady effecting of our cuts in our budget. So let me go back. The equitable share is mainly led by population numbers. So population-wise, KZN at some point was the highest in terms of the province. But we were overtaken by Gauteng, and we saw 2000 and the results came in Limpopo. We're losing people mainly to Gauteng and Western Cape. And so those provinces have been seeing an increase on their equitable share. But what National Treasury has been doing, let me mention just now, that Gauteng, it has 14 million and some changes in terms of population. KZN has 11 million. But can you see that in order to drastically now, it will be very drastic if National Treasury would just take that change and just take it all to Gauteng and even Western Cape. It will affect us. So what they've done over the years is that they've been effecting that change slowly, like phasing in over 3 years or 4 years. So it's not affected in 1 year. So we are not the second lowest in terms of the whole equitable share. We are the second highest after Gauteng. But even when you look at it, the whole effect has not been, of the change in numbers, has not been affected one time by National Treasury. They've been affecting over the years. So as a result, that's why our increase over the years is lesser than Western Cape and Gauteng. of the people they've got. In fact, let me mention that whenever I go to meetings on equitable share, those two provinces are always complaining because they want their equitable share for that year, like phase in now. But we are saying that you cannot do that because you destabilize the whole system. If you have to take like the amount that we need to be cut by and it goes to Gauteng and Western Cape, it will destabilize us so much. So it has to be done in an easing way. So we are effectively having a smaller population because people are moving to Gauteng and Western Cape. And in terms of the principles of the equitable share, it must follow where people are because now it means Gauteng has to provide more schools, it has to provide more hospitals. So that's why we've been losing money. But the other table that the colleagues showed from National Treasury, that is just our increase. So our increase has been lesser. When I say increase, this is just a year-to-year increase because of all of these cuts. But when you look at the whole allocation, we are second to Gauteng. So I hope I answer your question, Councillor Dlamini. Honorable Governor, I take your comments, which are good, that it should be noted that this budget is going to change, and you're concerned about these other programs of government that should not be stopped. And I should mention that in terms of the NSNP grant, as you would have heard from our colleagues from National Treasury, they are looking at changing the grant framework. Because, when you spend money in terms of the grant, it has conditions. So they're looking at now changing or adding some conditions so that it allows the departments to spend on COVID-related support. So one of those things that they're looking at, it is especially for the NSNP, the feeding of children in schools, is that take into account the COVID situation, how could you use that grant? So they are looking at tweaking the grant framework. Coming back to Honorable Sonjika, you are asking me about an event, the Drakensberg Extravaganza. I am very aware that it is funded by 3 departments, that extravaganza. What they explained to us, because that's one thing that's something that was a concern to us, they've explained that it is an event that takes place, is it over a week? I can't remember, but it takes more than 1 day. It is looking at running, it is looking at arts and culture issues. It is a whole, that's why they call it an extravaganza. So what they said to us is that each department is funding what is related to the department. So the running, that will be sports, and then the arts and culture issues, there will be arts and culture funding for what is related to, because they will have an event where it is musicians and arts and culture related things, and economic development is funding what is related to it. I must mention that major events in the province are looked by a committee called a subcommittee of the provincial government called the major events. So this event does go to the subcommittee on major events because it needs to be looked at there, and once it has been assessed and is considered by that technical subcommittee and the major events committee, it does come to Treasury for us to approve the transfer, because transfers to organizations and to municipalities have to be approved by Treasury in terms of the PFMA. So I am very aware of that, and it's also a concern for us as well on some of these things, because at the end you don't know unless the department, what we've said to departments is that you must get reports from these institutions that you are funding in terms of how your money was spent. And I think that's where one area it needs to be improved on, because departments can say, no, I'm only funding one area of the event, but to what extent really have they made sure that they're only funding that just one area? You also mentioned, Honorable Sonjika, on a grant. I couldn't hear the name of the grant, but I think from what you're saying it's a learner grant. I must mention that the learner transport expenditure by transport is not coming from a grant from National Treasury. It is a provincial treasury funding that we have taken from our own equitable share and have given to transport. That's why we've been having a challenge in increasing it, because as a provincial treasury, our allocations are being cut. So we don't have extra space to find more money to order to give to transport to provide. So at this stage, it is not a grant from National Treasury, and we are really hoping that it would be. And I've raised it on many discussions with National Treasury to say, for provinces that are semi-rural and rural like us, like KZN, Limpopo has the same issue, and even Eastern Cape, there are expenses that we incur just because we are rural provinces. Whilst somebody who's in Gauteng might not have to walk, a child, they doesn't have to walk very long because the schools are nearby, or even a child in the Western Cape. So that's something that National Treasury is aware of, and we've been having discussions on how some of this expenditure can be taken care of, whether we adjust the equitable share formula to take into account the rurality of the province, which is very difficult, or we introduce grants for some of those things. So that's something that is there. Honorable Rogers, you mentioned the 6.2 billion, and I even thought, did I even mention it in my presentation? I guess you went and calculated the share of the provincial treasury of the KZN in terms of the total 30 billion. Yes, it is around 6.2 billion, and I must mention actually that it is going to be more, because when we prepared this budget, we had about 3 billion from owned revenue. But now when you consider the fact that there's been a lockdown, so it means part of this owned revenue is not going to be collected. So that means that already our budget needs to be adjusted by the amount that is not going to be collected. So it means we need to find even more than the 6.2 billion. So in terms of process of how to do this, it was communicated to us through National Treasury and even our MEC. We are currently engaging with departments, and the matter was taken to Cabinet. And Cabinet has asked the MECs to look into the budgets together with us. And so we're working on finding this money that we need to communicate to National Treasury. What National Treasury has not told us is the modalities on how they're going to because what they're saying is that they want to take this money in order to fund health and education. But it is not clear whether what they're saying is that they're going to take the 6.2 billion from us, then allocate some money back, or they're going to say to us, okay, you have found 6.2 billion, now allocate it to health. So we're currently engaging with them on that one. So I'm hoping that by the end of this week there will be some clarity on how the 6.2 billion is going to be effected and also allocated back to the departments that have needs. And what we have been notified is that the National Minister of Finance is going to table the adjustments budget next month. So that means we also need, as the provincial treasury, to be ready with the adjustments budget. And I think that's one of the discussions that are currently there. And I don't know to what extent will it then come to this committee. But I think you should be aware that there's discussions on looking at this cut and also processing it, because there will be a need to then pass the adjustments budget, considering that there's been savings, but also there's been a need to reprioritize expenditure. I hope I've answered all your questions, honorable members and our guests.
No, you did. You answered all of them in detail, and you are very factual. Councillor Dlamini, as long as our people are not getting jobs in our own province, they will go to Gauteng and look for opportunities there. The same thing happens with the Eastern Cape. The reason why Eastern Cape is sitting at 4.6% of the equitable share is because they are flocking to the Western Cape. The Western Cape, as a result of the flocking of people from Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, that's why then they are at 7.2%. This is something that will be there until this movement is stopped. And as Mjuza was indicating, in 2009, KwaZulu-Natal had the highest number of people in South Africa. But 2011 census proved the difference. That's when Gauteng kept on overtaking us. They moved to 12 million, to 13 million. They are now above 14 million. We don't know how long will that trend go. Because our own people, in the main, they run to Gauteng because there are better employment opportunities there. So this is the reality that we have to factor in whenever we are dealing with budgets. On the question of Honorable Governor, definitely sure, we are not going to have business as usual. This COVID war that we are fighting it will require resources and sacrifice on the part of all of us. Therefore, we must know that the budgets are likely to be changed in order to put more resources in the fight against this COVID-19, as the World Health Organization is indicating. I think we have come to the end of this engagement. I want to thank the honorable members of the Finance Portfolio Committee, just for now in the presence of the stakeholders, understanding that we'll have to deal with a small business immediately after stakeholders had left. We thanked the officials of the National Treasury for the briefing and the responses they gave to our questions. We also wanted to thank you, Mjuza, and your team. I can see Lizelle is still with us and all the staff. Want to thank you very much for the presentation and the correct responses you have given to the questions. We want to thank all the stakeholders from the municipalities and the stakeholders from business, as well as from the academic world, for joining today's engagement. Now they have understood, they have got a picture as to how much is allocated to their own province from the 1st of April 2020 up to the 31st of March 2021. We also wanted to indicate that we are going to continue engaging you. What we want to see happening is the sharing of strategies on how to make sure that monies allocated to the people of KwaZulu-Natal, whether they are in my municipality, in Big Five Hlabisa, or anywhere in KwaZulu-Natal, are spent correctly and wisely. This is the role that we have as oversight. Thank you very much, stakeholders. Thank you a lot. So, honorable members, want to deal with the last item. The last item is on the mandate to the NCOP on the DORA bill, which they need tomorrow morning. So you have been favored with the short report with about 4 paragraphs that is talking to that one. And I would want to be open that when I was reading while the meeting was continuing, it's very clear that we feel that as KwaZulu-Natal, we need to support that budget. But we have got the understanding, as Honorable Governor, Honorable Rogers and other colleagues have indicated, that it is likely to be amended based on the war that we find ourselves in. So I just want to check from each member whether we support this report. Honorable Governor, what are you saying about this report and the mandate that we want to give to and the bill?
Chairperson, yes. I support the report, and I think that we should give the negotiating mandate accordingly to our team at the NCOP.
Thank you very much. Can I go to President Hlabisa, my leader? My president, you are still around.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Honorable Chairperson and honorable members, I support and give the mandate with the understanding that there will be an adjustment due to a coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Molwami. Honorable Madlopa.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I also support the report and also give the mandate to those that are going to represent us on the NCOP to present that mandate and also with the understanding that there will be reprioritization on the budget. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Honorable Nchangase, BN.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I support the report and also the comments that have been added by my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Honorable Sonjita.
Honorable Chair, Sonjita supports the report.
Ayihluphile mfana network namhlanje. Ngiyasola ukuthi ungale ngakithi kwaNkulunkulu kayixoshwe nje.
Ayekho enye indlela sihlala.
Okay. Honorable Zungu Manzini.
Thank you, Chairperson. I also support the report.
Siyabonga sihlalo omkhulu. Nonkosika is supporting the bill. I hope there is no honorable member that I left out.
Rogers.
Oh, Honorable Rogers mfethu ungasala kanjani mhlekazi?
Awu comrade chair kanjani?
Yes, Comrade Rogers.
Wakhohle emlungu nje kanjani?
Awu kodwa yini? Hawu ubandlululo.
I support you.
Thank you very much, honorable members. I'm very sorry. I'm following the alphabetical order, but it's not you are written number 2 from the top. That's why then the teacher missed his register because it's always alphabetically. Thank you very much. I also support the report and the bill. Thank you very much, honorable members, for the good work that you are doing. We are going to wait from the office of the Speaker and the Chief Whip as to when are we supposed to table the report on the hearings that we have held. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Bye,
Bye,
Chair.
everyone.
Bye-bye, colleagues.
Bye.
Ansla. Chief Whip. Number 4, are you back? By pen. By Pelly. Kunomthombeni la ozala umashezi ngiyambingelela.